The winter of 1867 came early to the Black Hills. Snow fell in heavy curtains across the plains, and the Oglala Lakota village of Chief Tatonka sat buried under silence, wrapped in cold that crept through buffalo hide and bone alike. Fires burned low in the teepees. Children pressed close to their mothers. And the elders, those ancient men with faces like carved stone, gathered in the council lodge and spoke of a woman they wished would disappear. Her name was Clara Marsh. She was 24 years old, the daughter of a failed trapper who had wandered too deep into Lakota territory and died of fever before he could wander back out. Clara had survived because she had learned quickly how to dry meat, how to soften hide, how to carry water without complaint, how to make herself small in a world that did not want her. For nearly 2 years she had lived on the edge of the village, tolerated but never welcomed, watched but never spoken to. She slept in a small shelter near the creek, worked from before dawn until after dark, and asked for nothing. But Red Cloud's war had poisoned the air between the Lakota and every white face on the plains. Tensions between the United States Army and the Sioux Nation had cracked open into something savage and unforgiving, and Clara was a reminder of everything the tribe feared: the slow creeping tide of white settlement, the broken treaties, the disappearing buffalo. Some of the younger warriors had begun to argue openly that she should be driven out or worse. Every day she stayed was a risk. Every day she stayed was an insult. That was what the elders said when they thought no one outside the council was listening. But someone was listening. His name was Chaitin, the son of Chief Tatonka, a man of 31 years who had earned the respect of his people through both courage in battle and rare restraint in anger. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with dark eyes that moved carefully across everything he looked at, the way a hawk watches before it drops. He had led raids. He had negotiated trade. He had buried 2 close friends after skirmishes with army scouts and had carried that grief quietly, the way warriors were expected to carry such things. His father trusted him above all others. His tribe loved him. And Chaitin was falling in love with the white woman by the creek, which meant he was standing at the edge of a cliff with the wind at his back. He had not spoken to her directly, not yet. But he had watched her for months, the way she moved with tired dignity through her daily tasks, how she never begged, how she pressed her lips together when the children threw stones near her shelter and kept her eyes down and kept working. There was something in her endurance that called to him in a language he could not explain to anyone, least of all himself. He had seen fear in people before. Clara Marsh did not look afraid. She looked like a woman who had made peace with difficulty and simply chosen to keep living. That, to Chaitin, was a kind of courage most warriors never found. The night the council decided to drive her out, Chaitin sat outside the lodge and listened through the cold air to his father's voice among the others. They spoke of the danger she represented. They spoke of the warriors who grew restless and angry at her presence. They spoke of omens and of duty and of what it meant to protect the people. And when the decision was made, 3 days, they gave her 3 days to be gone from their land, Chaitin did not argue. He rose from the frozen ground, walked through the dark village, and stopped at the edge of the creek where Clara's small fire still burned. She looked up at him across the flames. She did not speak. Neither did he. But something passed between them in that moment, not words, not touch, just the understanding that the next 3 days were going to change everything. Chaitin looked at the woman the tribe wanted gone and felt something settle in his chest like a stone finding the bottom of still water. He turned and walked back toward the village. He had a decision to make, and he already knew what it was going to cost him. By morning the entire village knew. Not because Chaitin had announced anything, he had not, but because a Lakota village in winter is a small, close world where secrets move like smoke through seams in the hide. Someone had seen him standing at the creek's edge. Someone had counted the minutes. Someone had whispered to someone else, and by the time the sun rose gray and cold over the Black Hills, the story had already grown its own bones. Chaitin went to his father's teepee before the morning meal. Chief Tatonka was a man who had led his band through drought and war and the deaths of 3 children of his own. He was 60 years old and looked older, but his mind was sharper than any blade Chaitin had ever held. He sat beside his fire and watched his son enter and did not say a word, which was itself a kind of question. Chaitin sat across from him. For a long moment, neither man spoke. The fire crackled between them. Outside, a dog barked once and went quiet. "I will not let them drive her out," Chaitin said. His father looked at him the way old men look at the young when they recognize something dangerous in them, not stupidity, but something more difficult than stupidity. Conviction. "She is not ours to protect," Tatonka said. "She has lived beside us for 2 winters and harmed no one," Chaitin replied. "Driving her onto the plains in this cold is a death sentence, and we both know it. It is the council's decision. Then I am asking you to change it." The silence that followed was the kind that has weight. Tatanka studied his son for a long time, the set of his jaw, the steadiness in his eyes, and then he said something that surprised them both. Is this about the woman, or is this about you? It was a fair question, and Chaitan did not flinch from it. Both, he said. Is there something wrong with that? His father did not answer directly. Instead he said, if you stand against the council for her, you will not just be protecting her. You will be telling your own people that your feeling for a white woman matters more than their fear and their judgment. That is not a small thing, Chaitan. That is a wound that does not heal quickly. I know, his son said. They may never forgive you. I know that too. Tatanka was quiet for a very long time. He picked up a stick and turned it slowly in his fingers, watching the fire eat the end of it. Then he said, I will not help you. But I will not stop you either. Whatever you do as yourself, not as my son, and not as this tribe's future chief. Do you understand what I am saying to you? Chaitan understood exactly. His father was drawing a line. Step across it, and you cross it alone. He rose, placed his fist briefly against his own chest in a gesture of respect that had nothing to do with agreement, and walked back out into the cold. He went directly to Clara's shelter. She was already awake, moving efficiently through her morning tasks, her breath making small white clouds in the air. She heard his footsteps and turned, and the look on her face was not surprise. It was the look of someone who has been expecting a difficult conversation and has quietly prepared for it. You know what the council decided, he said. It was not a question. Yes, she said. Her voice was steady. And you know you cannot survive the plains alone in this weather. Yes, she said again. Chaitan looked at her across the frozen ground. The whole weight of what he was about to do pressed down on him, the cost of it, the irreversibility of it, the way his tribe would look at him from this moment forward. He thought of his father's words. He thought of the warriors who would see this as betrayal. He thought of the council and their decision made in firelight without once looking the woman in her actual face. And then he stopped thinking about all of it. You will stay, he said. You will move into my teepee. And anyone who wants to challenge that will challenge me first. Clara Marsh looked at him for a long, still moment. Then she nodded once. Not with relief, not with gratitude, but with the quiet acknowledgement of two people who have both just stepped off the same cliff together. The ground was a long way down. They both knew it. Neither one looked away. The reaction was not slow in coming. By midday, the village was a different place than it had been that morning. Same snow, same cold, same teepees in the same positions, but the air between them had changed entirely. People moved through it differently. Voices dropped when Chaitan walked past. Eyes followed him from a distance and looked away when he looked back. It was not the open confrontation he had expected. It was something quieter and more corrosive than that. It was the withdrawal of warmth from people who had given it to him freely all his life. 3 young warriors came to him that first afternoon. Their names were Hoka, Runs Far, and a boy of 20 who everyone called Little Smoke because he had survived a lodge fire as a child. They were not cruel men in their hearts, but they were angry men, and anger in winter among people who feel threatened takes on a particular hardness. They stood outside his teepee and spoke loudly enough for the whole camp to hear. You bring shame to your father, Hoka said. Chaitan stepped out to face them. He was calm in the way that can be more frightening than fury, the kind of calm that has already done its calculating. My father knows what I have done, he said. I did not hide it. She is our enemy, Runs Far said, his jaw tight. Every white face is our enemy. You know what they have done to us. You have buried the same men we have buried. And now you bring one of them into your home and call it protection. What do you call it when a wolf takes the coyote's den? I call her a woman alone in winter who has lived beside us without causing harm, Chaitan said. I call the difference between a soldier and a woman by the creek a difference worth noticing. The council decided, Little Smoke said. His voice was younger than the others, and there was something almost pleading in it, not for Clara's exile, but for Chaitan to come back to where he belonged. Why do you put yourself against your own people for her? It was the question that carried the most weight, and Chaitan knew it. He looked at all 3 of them, men he had hunted with, men he had fought beside, men whose mothers had fed him and whose sisters had braided sinew rope with his own family. He understood their anger. He had stood inside it himself when the treaties were broken and the soldiers came. He was not dismissing what they felt. I am not against my people, he said, keeping his voice level and clear. I am for what is right. Those 2 things are not always the same, and the day we stop knowing the difference is the day we lose something that matters more than any enemy we have ever faced. The three men stared at him. No one threw a punch. No one drew a weapon. But the silence they walked away in was the loudest thing Chaitan had heard in years. Inside the teepee, Clara had heard everything. She sat beside the fire with her hands still in her lap, and when Chaitan came back inside she looked at him with an expression that was hard to read, something between gratitude and guilt and fierce, stubborn resolve. "You did not have to do this," she said. "I know," he said. "They may never accept it." "I know that too." "So why?" She asked it quietly, without accusation. She genuinely wanted to understand. Chaitan was quiet for a moment. He sat down across from her and looked into the fire. Outside, the wind had picked up, driving needles of snow against the hide walls. The teepee held the warmth carefully, the way a cupped hand holds water. "Because I have spent my whole life making decisions for my people," he said at last. "Every raid I led, every negotiation, every burial, all of it for the tribe. This one thing, this one, I am making for myself. And I find that I do not feel ashamed of that." Clara did not say anything for a long time. She looked at him across the fire, and whatever she was seeing in him seemed to settle something inside her too. She had survived 2 years alone in a world that did not want her by asking nothing and expecting nothing. The idea that someone had chosen her deliberately, at cost, against opposition, was something she had no ready language for. So she said nothing at all, which was its own kind of answer. The fire burned. The storm pressed against the walls. And in the village outside, the argument about what Chaitan had done had only just begun. On the 4th morning, the council summoned Chaitan. This was not a request. In the Lakota world, a summons from the elders was the turning of a wheel that could not be stopped, and showing up was the only choice that did not make things worse. Chaitan dressed carefully, tied his hair back, and went, alone, without asking Clara to speak for herself, because he understood that putting her in front of those men in that lodge would only give them a target for everything they could not bring themselves to say to him directly. The council lodge was large enough for 12 men. 7 sat in the circle, 4 elders, 2 war leaders, and Chaitan's own father, who sat with his eyes straight ahead and the look of a man who has already done his grieving before the thing is finished. The fire in the center burned high. Someone had put extra wood on it, which Chaitan recognized as deliberate. The heat was part of the pressure, a physical force added to the weight of 7 pairs of eyes. An elder named Standing Rock spoke first. He was the oldest man in the council, and his voice had the particular quality of old authority, not loud, but so deeply certain of itself that it filled every corner of the space. "You have defied a council decision," he said. "You have brought a white woman into the heart of this camp at a time when our people are dying from what white people have done to us. You have set your own judgment above the judgment of this circle. Tell us why we should not remove your standing in this tribe." It was the worst thing they could do short of exile. To strip Chaitan of his standing, his rank, his authority, his place in the hierarchy his father had built, would be to make him a man without a future among his own people. They all knew it. He knew it. His father's hands, resting on his knees, were completely still. Chaitan did not rush his answer. He let the silence sit for a moment, not as defiance but as respect, the understanding that a question of this weight deserved a response that had been fully thought through, not fired back in haste. "I will tell you something true," he said at last. 2 winters ago I sat in this same lodge when we discussed what to do about the soldiers moving through the valley to the east. You told me then that we do not judge every soldier by the worst of them, because some of them are following orders they did not write, living lives they did not fully choose. You told me that wisdom means making distinctions. I listened. I believed you. He let that land before he continued. Clara Marsh has lived beside this camp for 2 years. She has not scouted for the army. She has not sent messages to Fort Laramie. She has not harmed any child or any woman or any warrior. She has worked and she has survived and she has kept to herself in a way that cost her everything, her own people, her own world, her own hope of anything easier than what she has. She stayed because she had nowhere to go. She stayed because the plains in winter are death for a woman alone. She stayed because, as much as we do not want to say it, this place has become the only home she has. Standing Rock's expression did not soften. She is not our responsibility. No, Chaitan agreed. She is mine. I take that responsibility. It does not fall on the tribe, it falls on me. I am asking this council for one thing only: stop seeing her as a threat and start seeing her as a woman. If she causes harm to anyone, any harm at all, you can hold me to account for it. My standing, my future, whatever you decide it is worth. But do not drive her into the cold to die for something she has not done. The council was quiet for a long time. Men looked at each other with the careful eyes of people weighing things that do not easily go on a scale. Chaitan's father finally spoke, the first time since Chaitan had entered. His voice was low and careful, and he chose his words the way a man steps across ice. "My son has never given this tribe reason to doubt his loyalty," he said. "That must be worth something in this room." It was not an endorsement. It was not a defense. But it was something, a thread thrown across the divide, thin as sinew and just as strong. The council deliberated for the better part of an hour, with Chaitan sitting still in the heat of that fire, hands on his knees, watching his own future being turned over by other men's hands. When Standing Rock finally spoke again, his voice had not changed, still that iron-weighted certainty, but what he said surprised every man in the room. "The woman stays. But this council will be watching. And if anything at all, gives us reason to regret this, there will be no second summons. Do you understand?" "I understand," Chaitan said. He walked out of the lodge and back into the cold air of the camp. His legs were steady. His face gave nothing away. But inside his chest, his heart was moving the way a river moves after a dam breaks, fast and certain and going somewhere it had always been going, whether the dam existed or not. Spring came slowly that year, the way it always does in the Black Hills, not as an arrival but as a gradual argument, winter giving up ground one gray day at a time until suddenly the creek was running clear and the first small birds appeared in the cottonwood trees like notes in a song you had almost forgotten. The change in the land was mirrored by a change in the village that was smaller, quieter, but just as real. It started with the women. It always starts with the women. One morning, a woman named Wachiwi, whose husband was one of the warriors who had confronted Chaitan that first hard day, brought a small bundle to Clara's fire. It contained dried berries and a piece of tanned hide soft enough for sewing. She set it down, looked at Clara for a moment with dark and complicated eyes, and then walked away without a word. Clara looked at the bundle for a long time before she picked it up. She understood what it was. Not forgiveness, not yet, and maybe not ever entirely. But acknowledgement. The small, difficult admission that a person exists and is seen. Other gestures followed. Not many, and not all of them warm, but enough. A child stopped throwing stones. A warrior who had sworn never to look at Clara directly glanced at her one afternoon as she helped repair a torn lodge cover and gave a short, stiff nod before looking away again. Little Smoke, the youngest of the three who had confronted Chaitan, spent 3 days clearly wrestling with something inside himself before he finally approached her with a broken piece of harness and, without quite meeting her eyes, asked if she knew how to mend it. She did. She fixed it in silence and handed it back. He said nothing, but he did not look at her with anger anymore after that. Chaitan and Clara built their life together the way you build anything in difficult ground, carefully, without fanfare, attending to what was in front of them each day and letting the larger shape of things become clear on its own time. They learned to speak more fully in each other's languages. She learned Lakota words for the things that mattered: family, hunger, danger, care. He learned her way of naming the world too, the English words she used for patience and endurance and the particular light that comes just before dark. They were not a perfect pair in any romantic sense. They disagreed. They misunderstood. There were silences between them that were not comfortable. But they were honest, and they were constant, and in a world that was breaking apart at every edge, those two things turned out to be enough. Chief Tatonka never spoke of the council meeting to his son, and Chaitan never raised it. But one afternoon in early spring, when they sat together watching two young boys chase a dog across the melting snow, his father said, without looking at him, in a voice as casual as weather, "She is good with the children." It was not much. But from Tatonka, it was the equivalent of a long speech, and Chaitan received it as such. What happened to Chaitan and Clara in the years that followed is the kind of history that does not get written in official records, because official records were kept by people who did not understand that love between enemies is its own kind of revolution. It does not need to be loud. It does not need a treaty or a ceremony or the approval of any power greater than the two people living it. It simply needs the willingness to keep choosing each other against the logic of fear, against the pull of easier paths, against the voices that say your people and their people will never share the same fire. Chaitan had heard all those voices. He had let them speak. He had sat with them in cold lodge fires and in his own chest in the dark before sleep. And then he had made his decision not because he was reckless or rebellious or without loyalty to his people, but because he understood something that the fear around him could not see clearly. That the line between us and them is drawn in sand, and every great tide washes it away. That courage is not always war. Sometimes it is standing still in a place you chose, while everyone around you waits for you to leave, and refusing to move. The spring kept coming. The birds kept returning. The village kept living, battered, complicated, imperfect, and alive. And beside the creek where she had once sheltered alone in the cold, Clara Marsh was no longer alone. She stood in the light of an early April morning, her hands busy, her face turned toward a sound from inside the teepee, where a man who had defied everything for her was waking slowly into another day they had both chosen to share. Some stories do not end. They simply continue, in the lives of people who refuse to stop.